So everyone, now it's time to get started. So good morning to all of you, and good afternoon and good evening, I believe, to some as well. My name is Mia Kallenberg. I work at the GEF Secretariat, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. So first of all, a warm welcome to all of you to this BBL, which is part of a series of technical workshops and discussions that we organize to learn from experts and practitioners on specific topics linked to the GEF's work. And it's really nice to see people from so many different organizations joining us. So today's session will be a discussion around cities and forests and how the integration of nature in urban planning can bring many benefits for the environment, but also for urban citizens. As many of you know, the GEF has a program on sustainable cities that was launched in 2016 as part of the GEF 6 phase, and then scaled up in GEF 7 under its current name, UrbanShift. So this program is supporting an integrated approach to urban planning and design, where land use, urban forestry, and other nature-based solutions are among the sustainability interventions that many cities are focusing on to achieve global environmental benefits. And this program is led by the World Bank in GEF 6 and by UNEP in GEF 7. And in total, it's supporting 50 cities in 17 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And in fact, our new phase, GEF 8, that just started, will continue this program and will continue to work with cities and put even more emphasis on the integration of nature, looking at forests and green spaces from a territorial approach that also includes surrounding peri-urban areas. So the discussion today is very relevant from that perspective, and also for GEF's work on climate change mitigation and adaptation and so on, which we will hear about in a little bit. So to quickly go over today's agenda, we're going to start with two presentations, which I really look forward to myself. The first one will be given by our colleagues from the World Resources Institute, WRI. And after that, we will have a second presentation from one of our UrbanShift cities, namely Kigali in Rwanda. And we are delighted to have their Chief of Urban Planning with us on the call. After that, we will have a short panel with reflections by a couple of experts, followed by a Q&A session that is open to all attendees. So if you have any questions or comments during the presentations or after, feel free to write in the chat, and you can also raise your hand during the Q&A session. So now I am very happy to introduce our first speakers who are joining us from WRI. First, we welcome John Rob Poole, who is the Manager of Knowledge and Partnerships for UrbanShift in the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. And prior to that, John Rob was actually the Implementation Manager for Cities for Forests, which is a city-led initiative that works to connect cities with forests at different scales, and which we will hear about in the presentation soon. I also want to welcome David Gibbs, who is a GIS Research Associate in Global Forest Watch, also at WRI. And last but not least, let me introduce James Anderson, who is the Program Manager for Cities for Forests from WRI. So thanks a lot to all three of you for being here. And I hand it over first to you, James. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you to all of our colleagues out there at the GEF for hosting us, to the esteemed colleague from Kigali. Happy to join you this morning. As Mia said, my name is James Anderson from the Cities for Forests Initiative at the World Resources Institute. I'm based in San Francisco, where the dawn has yet to crack the horizon. So glad that the rest of you can join us from all over the world. I'm also looking forward to presenting with my colleagues, John, Rob, and David. They'll be getting into the substance of this presentation soon. But what we're really here to discuss are the crucial and very relevant benefits of trees, forests, and other nature-based solutions in and around cities. And this is the work here really represents the collaboration of several different initiatives in and around WRI, including our Cities for Forests initiative, the UrbanShift initiative that Mia mentioned, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the Land and Carbon Lab, and others. Please, on to the next slide. First, a little introduction to Cities for Forests that for those that are not familiar, Cities for Forests is a global alliance of more than 90 cities now, which are acting together to conserve, restore, and sustainably manage nature, especially the world's forests, for human well-being. And our member cities focus on catalyzing major forest-friendly policy changes, helping to facilitate flows of finance to nature-based projects, and advocate for forest conservation and restoration on the global stage. And when people hear our name, they often immediately think of the urban scale, which makes a lot of sense. And that's one of the key focuses of our work. And you'll see that on the far left side of the diagram on the screen here, what we call the inner forest scale. These are the urban street trees, park trees, green open spaces, urban green infrastructure that those of us that live in cities know and depend on. But a major part of our work is helping to expand awareness and deepen appreciation of the other scales at which nature is vital for cities. And that includes what we call the nearby forests, the nature surrounding a city that provides essential, usually essential watershed services, provision of clean drinking water, but also disaster risk mitigation through prevented floods, landslides, erosion, etc., as well as space for recreation. And one of the least appreciated scales in which nature contributes to cities is at what we call the faraway scale. Even though I live in San Francisco, I too depend on the health of the Amazon rainforest, the rainforests in the Congo Basin, or in Indonesia, because of course the vital services that they provide, sequestering carbon, helping to regulate global weather patterns, providing crucial medicines and commodities, as well as the fact that they're the home to a great many communities. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the network is more than 90 cities now, with a great amount of overlap with UrbanShift and many other city-based initiatives. And you'll see that it's truly a global representation of cities out there. We work really closely with cities from Jakarta to Kigali to Sao Paulo to New York. Next, please. And what we do with these cities is to provide support across a range of key areas, starting with political action and engagement, especially helping cities to use their political muscle and cultural and economic and social influence to raise agenda on the political, raise nature on the political agenda at the national scale. I'll touch on this just a bit more in a moment. But the real bread and butter of our work is this technical assistance and capacity building. And a key example of that we're going to focus on today is this effort to better understand the dynamics of greenhouse gas emissions resulting from changes in urban and community trees and forests. And then finally, we won't touch on this as much today, but we have a major program of work helping cities and nature-based solutions projects to unlock more finance through economic analysis, financial deal making, and better understanding of financial mechanisms that can really help us monetize nature, attract private investments, and greatly scale up the programs that we all need more of. Next, please. Just a quick example of some of the work that our program does on the political side, because this is often where efforts start. You need political buy-in. This example is the call to action on forests and climate, which was a declaration. On paper, it was really just a few pages of text that was assembled by our team and a group of leading cities that was issued at New York Climate Week in 2021. And it was a very straightforward declaration in some ways. It said, we, a community of cities, know that nature is important for our survival. We are investing as much as we can in nature-based solutions, but we cannot do it without the support and help of our national governments, our financial institutions, and the private sector. And that's why we call on those bodies to increase their ambition, increase their protections, increase their investments to help support nature. And this was issued just before the COP26, the previous climate COP in Glasgow, and we felt that it really helped set the stage for some of the ambitious action that took place there. Next slide, please. And finally, I'll transition over to my colleague David in just a second. That sort of political momentum has really helped open the doors for application of real nuts and bolts technical work with cities to help them better understand what exactly they can do on nature and what the value of nature can be to address the different issues that cities and their residents care about. Climate change being top of that list. And that's where we get into this new guidance for cities that can help communities better inventory greenhouse gas emissions and removals by trees and forests. And that is exactly what my colleague David is going to present to you. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. All right, so setting this within the context of what James just talked about, remember he was talking about Cities for Forests works on the inner city, or the inner forest, the nearby forest, the faraway forest. This guidance is for the inner forest, the forests within city and other community boundaries. And it's about climate change mitigation, not adaptation. We'll hear more about nature and adaptation, I think, later in this brown bag. So this is about mitigation, emissions and removals from forests and trees within cities and other communities. Next, please. Okay, a little bit about the motivation for this work. So there are hundreds, thousands of cities, counties, other local communities of some kind that are developing climate targets and other climate action plans all around the world. Next, please. But very few of those include forests and trees. Usually the climate targets are based on energy, transportation, other more fossil fuel driven sectors. Next, please. So colleagues of mine were curious about why communities weren't including forests and trees in their greenhouse gas inventories. And in communities, when I say communities, just to be clear, that counts cities, counties, any sort of subnational jurisdiction, could be university campuses. For short, I'm calling that community. So why haven't they been including forests and trees in their greenhouse gas inventories, thinking about the emissions and removals or carbon sequestration by forests and trees? And in a poll of a few dozen US communities, the most common reason for not including them, forests and trees in greenhouse gas inventories, was the lack of guidance. Second, insufficient data. Also, that the main guidelines that communities use for the greenhouse gas inventory is called the GPC, doesn't require it. And also some thought that greenhouse gases from their land would be insignificant. So we really honed in on this first bar here, the most common reason for communities not including forests and trees in their greenhouse gas inventories, lack of guidance. Next, please. Yeah, okay, so there are a few reasons that we believe communities should include forests and trees in their greenhouse gas inventories. And I have 5 of them here. This is not an exhaustive list, but one, it provides a more comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory. So you're including not just fossil fuel emissions, but some part of the agriculture, forestry, and other land use or FOLU sector. Second, it adds to community understanding of greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration. It's another, people don't really think about forests and trees. The public doesn't necessarily think about forests and trees in terms of greenhouse gases, but that is another way to think about forests and trees. And so this improves understanding and maybe in some ways makes it a bit more personal. Third, including forests and trees in a greenhouse gas inventory helps develop policies and programs to meet greenhouse gas goals, climate action plans, et cetera. Fourth, it facilitates conversations with other jurisdictions. And fifth, some communities could have a pretty high mitigation potential, either from reducing emissions from deforestation in their community, or potentially by maintaining or even increasing carbon sequestration or removals within their community boundaries. Next, please. There's another reason for making some guidance to help communities with their forest and tree greenhouse gas inventories, which is that inventories for forests and trees is somewhat different from other sectors for a few reasons. Forests and trees have usually fairly limited data compared to other sectors. Also, most communities aren't familiar with the greenhouse gas implications of forest and tree growth and loss. So it's a pretty new subject to them. There's natural variability in forests and trees where there isn't in, say, transportation or energy. Those are entirely man-made, human-controlled cycles. And finally, forests and trees also not only have emissions, but also greenhouse gas removals. And so considering both sides of the balance sheet is usually new for communities in their greenhouse gas inventories, often new for them. Next, please. So in order to address this guidance gap, we developed a supplement to the Community Greenhouse Gas Protocol, or the GPC. I want to be clear, the GPC, which was revised, I don't know, it was published maybe like 10 years ago. There was a revised version in 2021, I believe. It has a little bit about greenhouse gas inventories for the land sector, including forests, but it's very small. It's like 4 pages. It doesn't get to the nuance or complexity of some of the issues I described on the previous slide. So we wanted a more detailed guidance that would really introduce communities to the issues surrounding forests and trees. And okay, so we published a complete guidance with a few objectives in mind. So we wanted communities to cost effectively include forests and trees in their local greenhouse gas inventories. That is, not spend a huge amount of money or effort on it. Second, create international consistency and transparency in the way communities develop their inventories for forests and trees. Third, help cities and other communities understand how forests and trees can contribute to ambitious and transparent climate change mitigation goals. Finally, support reconciliation of national greenhouse gas inventories and community or subnational monitoring for mitigation targets. Next, please. Okay, what is in the supplement? And I'm not going to dwell too much on what's in it versus not in it, but to give you some idea of what's covered. So there's a little bit of background about forests and trees and carbon, because like I said, communities aren't necessarily familiar with the relationship there. Second, there's a fair amount about selecting inventory, the years and the area that a community would consider. There's a lot about the data needs, where to find data, options for data. Fourth is equations for doing the calculations for emissions and removals. And fifth is reporting results and setting targets. I want to be clear, there's no tool. We don't have a calculator as part of this. It's a guidebook. We have a worked example spreadsheet. There's sample calculations in the guide, but this isn't a tool, right? It's the needs and data options and contexts for each community are so different that we didn't really see a way to make a globally applicable tool at this point. And so we have guidance that we think is broadly applicable across most of the world and would meet most communities' needs for a basic forest-related greenhouse gas inventory. Next, please. Here's some of the things that communities can do with their forest and greenhouse gas inventory. They can establish a baseline and targets for mitigation and for climate action planning. They can design mitigation activities, like where to reduce emissions from deforestation, perhaps by controlling where development is occurring in some cases. They can increase equity by looking at where there's higher emissions and maybe also lower carbon sequestration in different parts of the community. They can track progress on mitigation and demonstrate the importance of forests and trees in climate action planning. Next, please. I want to talk very briefly about two of those topics. One is reporting. So the guide, in addition to having the calculations, helps communities work through reporting of forest and tree greenhouse gas emissions and removals. So we have a little bit of guidance on how to do that. You can see a snapshot of the spreadsheet here. It's supposed to be compliant with the existing GPC reporting framework. So this would just sort of slot right into the way communities are already reporting their multi-sector inventories, but we've sort of added a little bit of detail about the forest and tree part of it to incorporate removals. Another part of it is that communities are supposed to report the quality of their data. Next, please. Target, yes, okay. The last thing I want to talk about is target setting. So we help communities think about how they can set targets for greenhouse gas mitigation with their land sector or with forests and trees. Now there's sort of two targets to set. There's reducing emissions from forest loss, and there's also maintaining and potentially increasing carbon sequestration by standing forests and trees. And this can really depend on what's going on in each city. So we have a little bit of general guidance about how communities can do this, but one thing we're very clear about is that communities need to separately report emissions and removals targets and goals for their forests and trees. So we don't want communities combining removals in with their emissions. They need to be kept separate for reporting and target setting purposes. All right, that's everything from me. So on to John Robb.
Thanks very much, David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, super. Hi, everybody. Pleased to be here with you today. I'm going to reflect on the pilot applications that we did using this GHG inventory methodology simultaneously whilst developing the guidance. We conducted 4 pilot applications intentionally to test the global applicability and robustness of the guidance, and we did so with 4 diverse communities. As you can see on the screen, Salvador in Brazil, Mumbai, India, Mexico City, and Jakarta. The geography, the scale, the data availability, and the complexity varied significantly across all of these 4 communities, which was a good test for the global applicability of the guidance, as I mentioned. And each community really essentially presented a unique set of opportunities and challenges for us, from which we have derived some important lessons for future work. And I'm going to reflect on a few of those lessons learned as we seek to scale this guidance through other cities, and also seek to have the highest impact possible from conducting this type of work with our target audiences, cities and communities. So specifically in Salvador, Brazil, what we noticed and what we've realized since is that Salvador actually outsources the development of its GHG inventory work. So basically all of the analyses are conducted by a third-party consulting company. And by working with this company, we realized their value add really in the geospatial analysis and the production of credible and professional results for the city. Since learning this about Salvador, it's become apparent that many cities around the world in other contexts and continents, Africa, Asia, also, for example, use this type of arrangement to conduct their GHG inventories. And so a lesson learned for us here is that, not only engaging with the city departments, but identifying and then engaging with these third-party organizations that work directly with cities. Oftentimes local organizations are really one of our key influence actors. We also discovered, actually, in the case of Brazil, that they have access to really high quality and accurate, reliable land cover data through a data set called Map Biomass, which includes data at the subnational level. And the consistency, this will be no surprise, of this reliable and nationally available data really facilitates scaling in places like Brazil, as it's much easier for other communities to pick up the guidance and replicate it when data is available. And this, of course, cuts time and investment significantly, which promotes uptake. A great thing for a country like Brazil, which offers us a lot of opportunities in the years ahead. In Jakarta, Indonesia, we learned that there are really important political considerations in data selection. So the political economy of this type of work is really important. So, for example, we learned that the city government wanted to use Ministry of Environment data to inform the GHG inventory analysis, basically to aid in the uptake and the acceptance of the methodology and the results. But we also discovered that at the same time that the ministry's mangroves data was somewhat unreliable, somewhat outdated, and so there was quite a lot of back and forth between which data set is most appropriate, and drawing that line in terms of where you get uptake, where you get acceptance of the results versus the data that you use that you feel are most reliable and applicable. And of course, in the case of Jakarta, these decisions really added a lot of time and effort to the inventory process, but like I said, provided a really important lesson in understanding the political economy of the location in which we're working. In Mexico City, our inventory, as you can see from the map on the screen here, our inventory actually covered the entire state of Mexico and Hidalgo, the small one in orange that you see there, which includes Mexico City. And whilst we produced a detailed result that we and the stakeholders on the ground were pleased with, it really required a lot of input from various teams and an extensive amount of coordination between officials, who sometimes, frankly, have differing opinions and objectives, at the state and also at the city level. And so this really results in a lot of time and effort spent to secure alignment between the project's various stakeholders. And so for us, this emphasizes something that we're looking forward to in the next phase of this work. It emphasizes the need for outreach assets such as public webinars, perhaps a series of video tutorials, or other training materials that can help walk communities through the guidance and its really detailed process. And in this way, we can reach more communities and more cities with less of a time commitment to each inventory, and whilst building local capacity along the way. And then finally, in Mumbai, it so happened that the GHG inventory for forests and trees coincided with the creation of the city's first climate action plan, which was being supported by WRI India and C40 cities. And this coincidence was a really lucky happenstance, right? It resulted in much faster traction and political commitment for our pilot inventory compared with the pilots in the other cities that I've just presented. But it also meant that the pilot inventory process was much more time intensive in terms of laying the foundation for success and ensuring the accuracy of the results through multiple rounds of review by various stakeholders. Because in the end, the inventory for trees and forests was incorporated into the city's climate action plan. So we learned that even large and relatively developed cities like Mumbai really need deep technical support throughout the inventory process, whether it be through hands-on guidance such as we provided, or the training webinars, tutorial series, as I mentioned, or external capacity from those third-party consulting organizations that I also mentioned. We also learned that the verification and the reporting process to formally include the data and the results into city climate action plans and planning target really needs to be allocated sufficient time and resources. In the case of Mumbai, this was overcome because, as I mentioned, the forests and trees inventory process coincided with the city's climate action plan development process. But for other cities, this is something to look towards, to try and align, and to not and to consider, so that we place enough time and effort and resources on the verification and the reporting elements. I just have a couple more slides here. I just want to mention that in Mumbai, the results were incorporated into the city's climate action plan, which you can see here on the screen. And what this project has also resulted in is really a groundswell of interest from additional cities who are looking for support to do GHG inventories by their trees and forests and incorporate them into their climate action planning targets. It's also resulted in a lot of interest from various partners, not only the ones that we conducted this work with, namely C40 and ICLEI, but others, hopefully yourselves too, and potential co-funders. So right now we're in the process of figuring out what a phase 2 of this work would look like. There are additional resources that are available. We can make these slides available. David mentioned the worked example spreadsheet, which includes various calculations, equations, that people who'd like to compile such an inventory can use. We've also developed a 4-page summary for this work that distills it, which is available for download. And something that is also worth mentioning is a Scope 3 tool that will be coming out of Cities for Forests very soon, in about 2 or 3 weeks, that cities can use to estimate Scope 3, or otherwise known as like supply chain emissions from forests. What's next? We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to use this new supplement, please let us know what you're doing with it and how it worked for your city or your community. We're really looking for feedback at this point as we seek to scale through the next phase. And otherwise, thanks very much for attending and letting us know what you think. I'll do one shameless plug and then I'll hand it back to you, Mia. If you're interested in learning more about forests and cities, I'd like to flag the Cities for Forests report launch, How Better Forests Lead to Better Cities. This is happening next week, Tuesday, the 29th of November at 10 a.m. Eastern time. What it is a synthesis of hundreds of research papers that evaluates the case that forests at all levels, if you remember the slide that James presented, forests at all levels, inner, nearby, and far away, provide in terms of benefits to cities and their residents in terms of human health and well-being, climate change mitigation, water security, and biodiversity conservation. It's going to be a great launch. We have some super city leaders lined up to join the panel, and so I hope to see some of you there. Thanks very much. Back to you, Mia.
Thank you so much, James, David, and John Rob. And yeah, great and rich presentation, and also looking forward to this launch that you pitched for. So it's really useful to hear about, you know, the different scales that cities and forests are connected and that we don't always think about. And also thanks for presenting this new guidance that can help cities refine, you know, in a way their greenhouse gas inventories, so that they can better track and understand the nature-based climate solutions. So thanks so much to all three of you. We will now move on to our second presentation, where we will hear directly from a city that is indeed one of the leaders in urban forestry and nature conservation. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Solange Muhirwa, who is the Chief of Urban Planning from the city of Kigali in Rwanda. And she's in charge of the implementation of the Kigali City Master Plan and the strategies to support the city's economic green growth and well-being of its residents. And as I mentioned, Kigali is part of our GEF-funded UrbanShift program and also a member of the Cities for Forests initiative. So we're very pleased to have you joining us, Solange, and over to you.
Thank you, Mia. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Solange. I'm from Kigali in Rwanda. In Africa, it is an afternoon here in Rwanda. I don't know where you are. I'm going to present you what we are doing in Kigali to have urban forests in our city. Kigali is the capital city of Rwanda with 1.6 million people, and it has a size of 731 square kilometers. And maybe to give you a background why we choose to have a city which is green. Actually, there is a political will behind this choice. During the World Economic Forum, our president, His Excellency Paul Kagame, said that we are not making a choice between environment and prosperity, but we are rather looking at how we combine both. This is what we are doing. We are combining the building, the urban fabric, and also the greening, the forest in our city. Our goal is to make the forestry sector one of our base of our economy, and also try to balance the national ecological for sustainable benefits for our society. In Kigali, 32% of our land is reserved for green use. When I say green use, it's we are talking about the forest zone, how we can maintain the existing forest. And also, I don't know if you know Rwanda. Rwanda is called a country of thousand hills. So we have hills everywhere. So everywhere it is steep. We are also trying to maintain the steep slope we have here in Rwanda, in Kigali, and by planting trees on those slopes. We are also rehabilitating our wetland by transforming those wetlands in recreation zone. Why urban forestry is important for Kigali? We want to have a city which is green, which is health, and we are doing our best to reduce the vulnerability of our city to climate change. We want to have a green city, so that's why we are combining both the trees and also the houses. We have a master plan. The first master plan we have in Kigali, it was in 2013. Before that we didn't have any master plan. But we are we are doing our best to implement the master plan as it was designed, and we are encouraging the mixed use, and we are also concentrating the high density along the BRT corridor we have here in Rwanda. We are also promoting high density, so we can save space to put some garden, some forest, some greening. On the protection side, we want to preserve the existing open space we have. We are also acquiring new space for open space. We are also introducing the car-free zone in Kigali. So far, we have 4. We are also by a development right that prohibits certain type of development on certain plots. We are protecting the existing forests we have, and we are also built a well-planned neighborhood within our city. On the green strategy we have here in Kigali, we have a policy of having green corridors. When we have a road, as you can see on the picture, it is a must to have along that road trees on both sides of that road or in the middle. It is a requirement. So we also have an agenda of green infrastructure and green building. As you can see, we also have footpaths, and along those footpaths, we have to plant trees along those pedestrian paths. As I said, we have a steep slope here in Kigali, and our policy is to protect those slopes by planting trees along those slopes. Like I mentioned, before the master plan, we didn't have any plan on how to construct our city. We used to have a lot of properties or illegal activities within our wetland. Now we have relocated all illegal activities in our wetland, and now we are rehabilitating our wetland, as you can see on this picture. This is an example of a wetland called Nyandungu that was rehabilitated, and we have also started rehabilitating other wetland we have here in Kigali by emphasizing on making those space a green space. We also have the recreation areas in Kigali, and it is a requirement to have the maximum trees we can plant there. We have informal settlement. Like in other cities, we have slums. And when we upgrade those slums, our emphasis is to also have a space, to save a space where we can plant trees, where we can have a garden. For example, as you can see on the first image, it is an existing pattern of a slum we have here in Kigali. It is one section I took, and as you can see, we have a limited number of trees. But when we are rehabilitating, we are upgrading those informal settlement. What we do is to try to as much as possible to go higher, to densify those areas, and also save some space for green space. As you can see, this is the image we have of one of our slum called in Gitega. This is how it used to be, and next year, this is how we plan to transform this area by using a rehousing scheme. This is how we are upgrading or rehabilitating our wetland. This is an example of a wetland we have here in Kigali called Nyandungu. It was rehabilitated and inaugurated last year, and now it is open to public. Before it was a chaos, but we have tried our best to plant trees and bamboos and transform this area into an active public space, ecotourism park. When we plan our recreation parks, it is a must to have at least trees. We try as much as possible to maximize the number of trees we can have, so we can have that city we want to have a green city. It is a policy here in Kigali to at least plant 3 fruit trees. And even if you have a small land to get a construction permit, you have at least to show that you have reserved a land to plant trees, fruit trees. And today we have started a campaign to teach kids from primary school how to plant trees, and also to like this culture of having a tree. This is in line of our agenda of fighting the climate change. And today, our mayor, as you can see on this picture, he was with the kids, and he challenged those kids to take care of the trees that they planted today. And this culture will help them to love or to like this concept of having an urban forest in our city. And we have also challenged everyone in Kigali to plant at least a tree, 1 fruit tree at his home. Among our strategies, we are promoting the forestry and agroforestry in Kigali. We are also promoting the green transport design and plans. We are integrating afforestation everywhere in our plans within our city. We have also the green city. It's a green city concept project in an area called Chinyinya. It is going to cover 600 hectares. And sorry. Okay, this will be a pilot project of a green city in Kigali. If it will be a success, it will be replicated in other neighborhoods here in Kigali. We are also phasing out the use of wood and charcoal to cook our foods by introducing, it's a new concept here in Kigali or in Rwanda, using gas. But people start to like this, start to like using gas instead of using wood or charcoal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solange. It's always super inspiring to hear from a city what is being done on the ground, and I'm sure very inspiring to many of the people on the call. And I'm really fascinated by, you said you have managed to set aside 32% of the area for green spaces. So that's great. I actually had a chance to visit Kigali a few weeks back, and it's really a beautiful green city. And these wetlands, I went to them as well. It's full of people, and it really adds quality to know that the life of people. So thank you so much. We are now going to transition to a short panel discussion to hear some reflections from a couple of experts based on their experience working with urban forestry and land-based climate change mitigation. So I'm first going to introduce Simone Borelli, who works as an urban forestry officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, where he has worked for over 20 years in different positions, and he is also one of the creators of the World Forum on Urban Forests. So Simone, you are really one of the champions of urban trees and forests, and you recently published an article together with some colleagues on integrating agriculture, forestry, and food systems into urban planning. So based on this, what do you see are the enabling factors for cities to better integrate green spaces in their urban plans and policies? And what kind of benefits can we expect if this is achieved? Over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Mia. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Mia. Well, yeah, for once, I guess I'll have to step out of my purely urban forestry hat and try and have a sort of wider view, which is against my nature. You know, I'm a forester, so for me, trees come first, but all the rest comes into no. But let me put it this way: I think increasingly at FAO, but in general, there's been let's say, the awareness that we cannot operate in isolation. I mean, definitely trees and natural resources and green spaces are an important part of the city, but we are in the end putting people at the center of our work, or at least FAO is. And so looking at this people-centered approach, we really feel that we should go beyond just looking at the role of trees and forests, which is what I deal with, but increasingly try and integrate the management of natural resources with the production side, but also with the food system side. So let's put it this way: in my utopian world, what I would like to see is a market which is right in the middle of the park, and is producing vegetables in a field nearby. So you walk from your house through the park to the market and buy the local vegetables. So that's, let's say, a utopian view. But I think there are some real, let's say, future perspectives and really having a better look at how we can integrate these different aspects. And first of all, I think we have to look at what the challenges are. And I think very quickly, one challenge, and I think we see that throughout many cities, is the fact that the local government often does not have decision-making power on land use and territorial planning. That's with the ministry or with the planning office. And so the role of governments, local governments, has to be better recognized. And particularly, there needs to be a better work at intersectoral scale, or let's say intersectoral collaboration, both at, let's say, horizontally, but also vertically. Because let's say sometimes the responsibility for forests or trees in the cities is with the Ministry of Environment and not with the local municipality. Or the choice to promote agriculture sits with the Ministry of Agriculture, not with the Urban Planning Office. So there's definitely a need for more intersectoral collaboration. Also, a lot of urban planners have not been trained to do this. For them, urban planning is about, transport, electricity, sewage, but they're not really being trained to look at, green spaces, trees, urban agriculture, and even how to facilitate the availability of fresh foods. For example, by strategically locating markets and creating access to those. Now, I think Kigali is a fantastic example of how you can set aside land for, let's say, green and blue infrastructure, but that's not often the case. Often there's competition for land. So looking at the possibility of having multifunctional green spaces that can provide different services, like, of course, climate change adaptation and mitigation, but also production, water management, and so on, is also essential in cities that are growing very fast. And unless we do that, unless we can sort of start thinking in, let's say, multiple dimensions, we will not really succeed. Another important challenge, I think, is that of looking at these aspects in a circular economy framework. I think a colleague from Kigali also mentioned the idea of, Solange mentioned the idea of, building with wood, green buildings. And so that's another element, the wood that comes from the forest can be reused for trees, for building, if put in sustainably. The waste can be used as fertilizer for the trees and so on. So there is there's, let's say, a key point in terms of looking at a circular economy as a factor. How do we do this? I think John and others have raised the point. We need to raise awareness. We need to make sure city decision makers understand the importance of the different services that green spaces, but also urban agriculture and food systems can provide to people's health and well-being. In the end, it's about, we want healthy and happy people. I mean, I always say that I like to be the happiness officer. You know, when I plant trees, I make people happy, I hope. But it's also a matter of creating the enabling environment, so creating the space for this type of discussion. So in the cities we interviewed, for example, Kisumu, but also in Quito, there are these multi-stakeholder platforms that involve both the local administrators, but at the same time, the local associations, civil society, the people in general, to really take decisions on what the future should hold in store. We need to build the capacity of people, so we need to make sure people are better trained to have this more holistic view, not just focus on, you know, I got to put in the street or I got to put in the sewage system, but I have to look at the overall picture of planning. And finally, maybe a last word is on, we need to also make sure, and I think this is very clear from WRI's message, we need to strengthen urban-rural linkages. What happens in the city impacts what happens outside and vice versa. So a city depends directly on the food shed, on the watershed, on the woodshed, on the cultural services even of the surrounding area, and vice versa. The rural areas are heavily impacted by the type of planning, the type of policies and the type of strategies that cities adopt. So the complete conclusion, we need to, I think, work a little more towards this idea of integrating these different aspects. There are some positive examples. I think Kigali is an excellent example. And we need to, you know, spread the word and somehow, this is something I'm launching now, create an alliance around the idea of, you know, in nature-based cities. I mean, there's a lot of actors working, WRI for sure, but Clay and others. And we hope to do a bit of this. And let me just say, I'll have the floor to announce that we also have a big event happening next year. Actually, it's in Washington, DC. It will be the second edition of the World Forum on Urban Forests. So I will post the website in the chat, but it's going to happen more or less 1 year from now, 16 to 20 October 2023. So the call for abstracts should be going out soon, but we also envisage to have a series of policy dialogues, alliances, and all kinds of other events around the technical and scientific conference. So you're all welcome to join us. We hope you all want to join us, those who are in DC and also those who are not. And I'm happy to answer any questions after this. Over to you, Mia. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Simone. Yeah, I really agree. We have to spread awareness, and this is part of what we're doing now, and also what we try to do through our UrbanShift program. And we hear your clear message on we need better integration across sectors, integration of natural resources and food systems and so on, as well as the vertical coordination between the local and the national level, which is also something that we try to support through our Sustainable Cities program. So thank you so much. We will now turn to our next discussant, Remy Roa, who is a senior climate change specialist here at the GEF. He's got experience working with climate partnerships in Africa and other places, and has also worked quite a lot on different topics, including climate planning and transparency and carbon sequestration. So Remy, can you reflect a bit on how you see urban forestry and nature-based solutions linking to the GEF's work now that we're heading into the GEF 8 cycle, and how do you think that the GEF partnership can benefit from the GPC Supplemental Guidance that we just heard about? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Can you hear me well? Perfect. Thank you, Mia, and thank you, John Rob, James, David, and Solange and Simone for the very interesting presentations and reflections on urban forests and the role of trees and nature-based solutions in an urban context. I think those are really exciting new developments, and they really provide perspectives that echo really well with the recent developments that we are experiencing in our programming. So I will reflect a little bit on this. From a methodological standpoint, the standards and methodologies for preparing GHG inventories are one of the key steps to develop and implement ambitious urban projects that deliver climate change benefits. And this is one of the target area for the GEF partnership. And for this reason, a few years ago, so back in 2015, as the GEF transitioned to the sixth cycle, we published guidelines that include references to useful tools and approaches and methodologies to calculate GHG emissions for GEF projects in particular. And the GPC guidance, so the Global Protocol for Community Scale GHG Inventories, was referenced as one of these useful standards as a way to improve this consistency, to organize data and assessments across different sectors in an integrated manner. And there has been some examples, including for the Sustainable Cities Integrated Approach Pilot, so one of the ancestors of UrbanShift, during the GEF 6 cycle of national projects, for example, in India, that have taken this approach and that have used the GPC guidance in order to assess and design actions across multiple sectors in a few cities and to consolidate them as a way to design the project. And since then, and with the GEF 8 cycle, there has been now, as you mentioned, Mia, an increased focus on nature-based solutions, and that is true both for the Sustainable Cities Integrated Program, but also for the climate change mitigation focal area priorities, which now include nature-based solutions, both as a cross-cutting objective, but also as a standalone pillar. In the previous cycle, in GEF 7, for example, the intervention in the climate change focal area focused mainly on energy efficiency, mobility projects, and clean tech innovation with a pure, let's say, climate change entry point. And in this cycle now, nature-based solutions and land-based interventions in general are reflected with more emphasis, including in the urban level, but also at other level. And there is also a new focus on integrated programs. And there is one new integrated program that will look at net zero nature positive strategies, and that will focus on pathways to reach net zero that are also contributing to biodiversity and land degradation objectives. And this is one example among many other integrated programs that reflect a higher emphasis of the GEF of integration across sectors that you mentioned, Simone, as well in your intervention as being key. So the publication of this supplemental guidance for forest and trees that was presented today is therefore relatively timely, and it's very timely actually on that regard, as it can help guide cities to better account for trees in their inventories, and it can then feed into climate plans, as was presented by John Robb, and it can also feed in broader national strategies and project design as well, which is very relevant to the GEF partnership. I found quite interesting in Solange's presentation of the case of Kigali and in Simone's reflections as well, that there is scope to integrate trees not only as a standalone intervention, but also to integrate them in the core sectoral areas of intervention of the GEF that are mobility projects and the building sector, for example. So this is also a very interesting prospect. In terms of perspective, I think the colleagues that are here today from the climate change mitigation team will probably be able to complement on how they have experienced this in the Sustainable Cities IP so far, and how it can contribute to increase the consideration of trees in these projects. But a few points that I could also make is that one of the interesting prospects that I take from the presentation today is also this work that is ongoing on scope 3 emissions outside the city's boundaries, because this is a scope of emission that is at the core of the GEF approach, because most of the GEF projects are somehow taking a value chain approach and indirect impact approach. So it will be quite interesting to see what this work on scope 3 emissions will produce. And it will also be interesting to hear about the non-land-based impacts of trees in cities, because the land-based impact is of course at the core of the inventory work, but there's also a lot of other benefits that have been mentioned today, such as effect on cooling and relations to mobility, and this is also a good way to connect the dots with the GEF areas of intervention. So that is all today. In summary, a lot of very interesting prospects for the GEF 8, and the examples we heard today are are very inspiring in that regard. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you so much, Remy. As you said, there are lots of applications for this kind of work within the GEF and our mandates. And thanks also for highlighting how this new inventory and methodology can be really like applied through our network. So as you said, also very timely as we now gear up for GEF 8. So we are now going to move to a Q&A session and open up for questions from the audience. So please, if you have any comments, questions, please either write them in the chat or raise your hand and I can give you the floor in the Zoom meeting. And we still have our great speakers on the call and our discussants and other experts. So this is a great opportunity if you want to ask anything. I see one hand already. Let's see, Simone, do you want to start us off, please?
Yes, Mia, let me start it off as nobody else has raised their hand. I actually posted it in the chat. Now, thank you very much. I think the protocol looks great. I was just wondering if it also has considerations on the indirect effects of trees on GHG, both in terms of positive ones. For example, if you have a cooling effect, the air conditioning consumption goes down, or if you have a, let's say, warming effect, the consumption of heating goes down. So that's an important effect of trees in cities. The other one is on the negative side. If I have to maintain trees in cities, I need machinery. I need watering. So that produces GHG. So are those accounted for, or are they just, not maybe the next iteration? Just a sort of general question.
I can take that. It's a good question, Simone. Thank you for asking. I didn't get to talk as much about what is and isn't covered by the GPC supplement as I might have with a little bit more time. So no, this GPC supplement doesn't consider indirect effects of trees, either reduction in energy needs from improved cooling due to trees, or energy or water or other environmental needs for maintaining trees. Those aren't things that would traditionally be considered in a greenhouse gas inventory, because remember, this isn't supposed to look at the full suite of benefits for trees. That it's important to consider the full suite of benefits from trees, climate wise, water wise, biodiversity wise, but this was very focused on trees within the more narrow context of greenhouse gas inventories, the emissions and the removals specifically from biomass and to some extent soil loss. So the indirect effects are not covered. While important, they wouldn't fall within the general extent of a greenhouse gas inventory. The energy used by a city to maintain its trees would be covered under the city government greenhouse gas inventory for for the parks department or transportation department or something, whoever's responsible for maintaining the trees. So those emissions for maintaining trees would be reflected elsewhere in a greenhouse gas inventory theoretically.
But the ones for cooling, we can take this offline and discuss further some other time, but there's very interesting studies on the exponential growth of electricity use based on heat differences. So 1 or 2 degrees in air conditioning is an exponential emission of GHG or electricity. So anyways, there's a lot of studies in the Gulf, but we can take this offline and discuss some other time. Sorry to take up the time here.
No, that's great. That's great. Thank you, both of you, for these questions. And I saw there were some questions in the chat and also from Remy on this, the non-land-based benefits of trees and forests, and also including air quality and so on. So I know that you've just started this work, WRI colleagues, but yeah, it's also, there are so many opportunities. And I also heard you're working on the next scope 3 emissions. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more on the next steps and where you're heading next as you develop this guidance. John, Rob, or anyone, do you have any plans for the near future for this guidance?
Sorry, Mia, specifically the scope 3 guidance?
Yeah, or in general, what are your thoughts on the coming steps to refine this even further?
Yeah, super. I can have a crack, and then David, do you want to jump in? Yeah, so I think David did a really good job at outlining, and then also in response to Simone's question, exactly what the particular supplement that we're talking about here does, right? So it's a Scope 1 emissions and removal supplement. So it doesn't include methods for estimating emissions from sourcing areas or the supply chains, but this is the guidance that will be coming out of the Cities for Forests project in a couple of weeks' time. I don't believe that there's a date set for publication, but I do believe that it's during the week of December the 5th. So look out for it, folks. Essentially, what it does is what this publication will do is provide the technical background for a tool that the Cities for Forests initiative uses, which is called the Forest Footprint for Cities tool. The idea is to enable cities to estimate their emissions related to deforestation that is caused by the consumption of commodities that come at the expense of forests, what are known as forest risk commodities, such as palm oil, beef, soy, rubber, cocoa, and so on. And so the Scope 3 emissions, because they're from supply chains outside of cities, even though they are consumed within cities, even though those commodities are consumed within cities, is Scope 3 necessarily, and should complement the Scope 1 methodology that we've described here for cities to get a much more holistic picture of their emissions related to trees and forests. David, do you want to complement maybe about our plans for the Scope 1 methodology that we've described and where we're looking forward to?
Yeah, I guess for Scope 1 methodology, we aren't planning. It's already like a pretty hefty set of guidance. Just looking at the direct effects of forests and trees on greenhouse gases by itself was over 100 pages, which is a fair amount for cities to digest on fairly limited, technical expertise and budgets. So there's more that could be covered in guidance, more expanded guidance on soil potentially, or agricultural emissions or non-forest carbon emissions and removals. We're not planning on covering any of that right now, even though there's some demand and some interest in that, just because this is already a lot for communities to digest. What we think communities really need at this point, and John Rob alluded to this, is some way of helping more communities more rapidly work through this guidance. As I said earlier, I don't think that we can make any sort of globally applicable tool because data availability is just too diverse across countries. Like, it really depends on the country and even the city for the most part. So we can't make a tool, which is what some communities have asked for, but it's not really going to be an option, unfortunately. The US has a good tool for community forest greenhouse gas inventories called the Learn tool, co-run with ICLEI USA. It works great for the US because the US has consistent data, but data sources are just too different across different countries and cities, unfortunately. So something like a set of webinars to help a larger cohort of communities work through the guidance is something we're thinking about, maybe like 15 to 20 cities and other communities around the world that we could sort of like work through the guidance together, and they could then hopefully work with other communities in their respective areas or national networks to further socialize what we've done here. To some extent, that's already happened through WRI offices with the staff that we've worked with in WRI Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, India. But it'd be great if cities started teaching other cities how to do this, or consultants based in Brazil or India or whatever other countries started working with their clients nationally. So we see that as a way to sort of expand the uptake of this kind of work. And I think that's where we're heading right now, more of like expanded uptake of the guidance that we already have.
Yes, thank you, David and John Rob. And in a way, I kind of appreciate that this is very clear in its scope and its usage, and I'm sure this will be very helpful for cities as well to include it in their local greenhouse gas inventories, and maybe that can help cities kind of be empowered and contribute to the national plans and targets as well. Something that Simona, alluded to, that cities need they need the empowerment, and they need possibilities to act. So thank you very much for that. I haven't seen any other questions, but I have a question for Solange, if you're still on the call. I think you are, because you mentioned that you have worked to rehabilitate green spaces in the city, and you're also looking at buying new space to green and to increase the coverage of nature forests. So Simona mentioned, the challenge of competitive land uses, and Kigali, as many cities is expanding and the population is growing. So what kind of dialogues do you need to have with different stakeholders and different actors in cities to be able to achieve these great results that we see in Kigali? If you have a comment on that, Solange. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, the master plan of Kigali is helping us in implementing this strategy, because there is a minimum landscape, there is a minimum greening space required in each plot. So everyone is obliged to comply. This is for private project, but for government project, it is a must. Actually, like I said, it is there is a political will behind this successful story.
Thank you. Yeah, I really see how you've worked with it in a very strategic way, and of course, as you said, with a political will behind you, which of course is crucial. So thank you. Thank you so much. We have maybe one last question here in the chat from Laura. Do you want to take the floor, Laura, and ask a question? Otherwise, I can read it out.
Yeah, sure.
It was a great question, so thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, very well.
I see Simone is responding to me. So I'm representing EBRD, and we are working with Green Cities Programming, so at the municipal level. And what we do, we develop different action plans for specific cities. And one of the sectors we work with is the nature and biodiversity, land use, and green spaces. And while we have incredible interest from the city side and support of the consultants and very much of some sector specialists, we lack, as I said in the comment, this bankable part of the actions. So it is very much attractive for the cities, but not attractive enough for big organizations to invest and scale up such projects. So very often we end up scaling down such actions so the city can't support it financially by themselves or find some smaller funds from outside. And my question is, I mean, it's a big question. I know there's no one answer. It's a very complex problem, but maybe some direction how to even approach such topic, how to talk with such organizations, and how to make them, I don't like to say it, but more attractive, basically financially, because we know how important it is. We know all the benefits, but it's often not enough to make it attractive. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's been brought up in many different forums, so very valid. Simona, do you want to have a response?
I think I already posted a quick point in the chat, but I'm working on a Horizon 2020 project, which is between EU and Latin America. And there we are doing exactly this. One of the components is to actually evaluate, value, and valorize nature-based solutions in urban settings. So we're looking at really building the business case for sustainable urban drainage systems, restoration of water bodies, urban forests, and so on. So we are working on that. Hopefully we will be able to share some tools and results next year. Definitely won't be the ultimate solution, but at least one of the possible pathways. But definitely, unless you can sell nature-based solutions to large-scale investors, it's always going to be a sort of intellectual exercise and not very useful. So we have to make the case for bankable business models, as Laura said. But I said I'm happy to discuss further offline again.
Thank you, Simone. John Rob, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I can add really briefly. Thanks very much. Yeah, Laura, it's a great question. I think it could have a whole series of webinars dedicated to it in its own right. I'll make a plug for the team that that James works on, the Cities for Forests team at WRI, because they do a lot of work on developing the economic case and making projects financially viable. There are so many things, right, that need to happen. The economic case needs to be made through pre-feasibility of projects, you know, assessing the cost benefits of them. We need more empirical evidence related to nature-based solutions projects. I would argue that most of the evidence right now is related to nature-based solutions and the water sector, but we know that the benefits go way beyond that, and those other sectors are not well empirically evaluated. I would argue that we need more robust and independently verifiable monitoring and evaluation. So organizations like all of ours and donors need to be paying more attention and putting more time and money towards that, so that we can build a long-term evidence case for nature-based solutions, because we know that these impacts are not going to be felt after 3 years or 5 years, which is the typical timescale of a project. We know that if you're looking at reforesting a watershed so that you get water benefits, that's on a generational timescale, 20 years plus even, right? So we need more of that robust, independently verifiable monitoring and evaluation. And then I would argue that once you have all of those things, what you need is the aggregation of projects, right? So if we're thinking about comparing nature-based solutions to traditional infrastructure projects, and certainly at WRI, we argue that nature should be incorporated as an infrastructure expenditure in cities. We need these projects to be competitive with other traditional infrastructure projects, which are typically in the billions of dollars, right? So small little nature-based solutions projects in the orders of a few $100,000 or in the orders of a few million are really not on the scale that's of interest to big investors. There's just a few things that come to mind. There's so many things, and there's so much work that our team at WRI does. I see a colleague of mine, Suzanne Osmond, on the line, and of course James can also speak to this. It's a great question, though. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John Roberts. It's indeed something that can be discussed in a whole separate series. But yeah, it's good to have this conversation going in relation to your methodology, and also, looking at the successful examples from, for example, Kigali, how it can be done there. I think it's time to move on. So thank you everyone for these comments and questions, and of course a warm thank you to our speakers and discussants for taking the time today. I am now going to hand over to my colleague Alok Barnwal for his closing remarks before we end this session. Alok is the coordinator of the Sustainable Cities program here at the GEF, and as senior climate change specialist working with the climate change adaptation team here. So Alok, we look forward to hearing your reflections. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mia. Can you hear me well?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, great. Excellent moderation. Thank you to you first. And huge thanks to our speakers from WRI, John Rob, David, and James. Very, very exciting, enriching information today. And especially to Simone for reflecting your critical thinking around this. Given that you are so much deep into this topic, it's always good to hear diverse perspectives or different views, which can really make us more intrigued, like what else we can do to add value to what we are doing. And for Solange, thanks a lot. It's, as Mia said earlier, it's always good to hear directly from cities on how things work or how things don't work. What are the actions that you take at macro policy level, as well as with individual households, like your target of this nearly 33%, keeping the city green, but also at the household level, asking people to plant at least 2 or 3 trees. So these micro, small, as well as macro initiatives is always good to understand from cities or listen from cities directly. Yeah, very useful discussions, relevant questions on the tool that has been developed, particularly looking into the co-benefits aspect, which I think it's quite natural, right? When you talk anything about cities are so naturally integrated. You can't really think in a straight line that, okay, trees, nature-based solutions, and GHG reduction. You have to think of other aspects of citizen well-being in cities, which is the impact on cooling or reducing energy consumption, flood management, and other things. So if the guidance can really look into these aspects going forward, because probably it will be difficult to inventorize all of the things, but at least some guidance or complementing other work that is going on could be really useful. So yeah, so excellent discussion. Just few broader reflections. I think, although it has been said a couple of times, but probably I'll take the opportunity of speaking at the end to repeat some of them. First, thanks for presenting the Cities for Forest program. I think this is an excellent program. This is something that is bringing really forest cities, together. This is, trying to address the gap that, when we talk about forests, it's not just primary forests and reserve forests. If we look at the entire equation of nature-based solutions or forests, cities are an important space where we have to talk about it, and they are part of this overall equation. And given the sprawl that is happening globally, and that 2/3 of population is are living in cities, it's really important that we talk about it, and we understand cities and forests really well to achieve the goals that we have set for 2030 and going forward in 2050. So that's really good. And Cities of Forest is one program which is great. There are many other programs going on in parallel, and it's great that all the programs are collaborating, like Cities with Nature of ICLE, Cities for Biodiversity by World Bank, Biodiverse Cities Initiative by World Economic Forum, looking into the private sector and innovation aspect of seeing how nature-based solutions and forestry elements can be scaled up. So overall, these initiatives have really scaled up or accelerated the momentum, the political momentum that is needed. And I think you go to any urban sustainability or urban forums now, this is probably one of the highlights. I was in Katowice earlier on World Urban Forum, and almost every session, every mayor spoke about nature-based solutions, importance of green spaces and forestry. So we can see there is a shift happening, and every city is really talking about it. So thanks, great work on Cities of Forest. Thanks for collaborating with us on UrbanShift and bringing all those elements together. On the GHG on the protocol or assessment tool, yeah, I am with the sentiments of some of the participants that we need to do more, but we are able to say it because there is something on the table, there is something developed. So I think more such comments to the team will really add value to the protocol supplement that has been added. But it is really a great start, and it is quite critical at this time, I think, not just for Jeff 8, as Remy said, but also given that now cities are really taking leadership in tackling climate and biodiversity and meeting biodiversity goals, like they are taking net zero targets, for example. Now, for that, to achieve that, they need these tools to understand what the baseline is, and if they have to become nature positive or net zero, of course, nature-based solutions will be playing a major role. And so, this tool can be really useful in setting those targets or achieving those targets. So that's that's on the tool. We discussed a number of challenges. Thanks, Simone, for highlighting some of those. I think, and some participants also mentioned, including Laura from EBRD, about some of the issues. I think I took two or 3 points which are very relevant, and something that in the UrbanShift or in our GEF 8 program going forward, we will be looking at working with you and others, is on the data side. Because that's really a barrier. It's great that you're looking at the GIS data, David, and to map all these things. But yeah, so there are many other data gaps which will be particularly relevant when we look into some of the co-benefits, for example, or when we look at the supply chain of Scope 3 emissions inventorization. So that is something that needs to be worked on. Or we can collectively work on that. The science, I think that's also very important. Urban greening of forestry is not just about any plantation. We cities have to be careful that there are no invasive species. What species suit a particular climate context, and what can deliver the cooling effects or other co-benefits. So the science needs to be probably more stronger when we talk about urban nature-based solutions or forestry, compared to the gray infrastructure, where I think there are a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of science technology available to make a case. But probably for nature-based solutions in cities context, this needs to be scaled up. It has been there in the broader primary forest and other areas, but in the urban context, an area that we can really look at working on. The political economy side, the competitive land use, and all those things are, of course, something that we all understand. We try to work on it. Some of the tools can be really useful. For example, we have a project which is looking at economic valuation of nature-based infrastructure in cities and in other areas. So putting a dollar value of most of the benefits that nature-based solutions or forestry solutions in cities can provide. So those kind of tools can really help move the needle, shift the position, enhance understanding. And as John Rob, you said, that it should be part of core urban investment, whether it's about conservation or whether it is about protecting the existing forest or creating new forest to prevent landslides or other impacts of climate change. So and one final point, which is I'm intrigued by one of the comments, which is that how we can present these present this urban forestry or urban nature-based solutions as solutions to tackle some of the climate extremes like flooding or similar vulnerabilities which can attract city planners or citizens. So that's great, and I think we should do that. But at the same time, I think we should also look at some of the slow onset aspects of or the benefits of what biodiversity can bring in. Of course, we can't really realize it immediately of having a good, rich biodiversity in a city, but making that more explicit, that how it can contribute to clean air, clean water, and health is something that is a challenge, but something that we need to work on. So that's it from my side. Overall, great to have this discussion. We can see the momentum. We, as climate finance, biodiversity finance institution, we are delighted that we are working in cities to bring climate, biodiversity, and nature together, and also to deliver inclusive and resilience benefits in cities. So we really look forward to advance this discussion going forward. Thanks for sharing the upcoming BBLs on this topic, John Rob and colleagues from WRI. And I'm sure that moving forward, as this is one of the priorities of GEF 8, we will be having more such discussions, and we will welcome your ideas or thoughts on how we can really improve and make an impact together. So with that, thanks a lot, and I'll pass on to Mia to say something and close.
No, I don't have much more to add to that. Alok, that was great, and thank you to everyone for joining us today and for taking the time. It's been great to see all the different aspects and benefits of cities and forests. So just wishing you a good day, a good evening, good morning to some, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.